All right, everyone. Super pumped here, highly caffeinated. I have my man, David Pallmann, joining me today. Dude, I'm not even going to introduce you. You glaze yourself. Tell everybody who you are, why you're here. So good to have you, my man. Welcome to Worldview Mastery.
Thanks for having me on, Tim. Fan of your ministry, of your work, of your thought process on things. So, yes, definitely happy to be here. As you said, my name's Dave Pallmann. I do theology and apologetics. I'm a YouTuber, go by the moniker Faith Because of Reason, and, do work in largely soteriology, resurrection apologetics, a little bit on the existence of God, probably not as much as you do or as much as I should. And recently some stuff on mind-body dualism. So those are some of my areas of interest.
Love it. Love it. And what I'm going to do is Faith Because of Reason. I'm going to go ahead and put your link in the comments here so that everybody knows where to find you. What I love about your videos right now. What I love about your videos right now is you're like taking me back to like 2015 inspiring philosophy days, man. Like, dude, I love the format. Like, it's taking me back to when I was like first getting into all of this seriously for the first time, like the voiceover, the B-roll, all of that. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, inspiring philosophy, Michael actually obviously rather heavily inspired my video format. But he also was the one who kind of inspired me, ironically, to get out there as well. I just remember a talk he gave and was saying, like, to those of us connoisseurs of Christian apologetic content, sort of on the sidelines, he was saying, just do something to get out there. And he said that could be, a YouTube channel, a blog. He gave some other suggestions. And I had like a little bit of experience putting like slideshow videos together. I was like, well, I could do that, I guess. And so I started doing that about 5 years ago. And, here we are today. So I actually kind of owe my channel to inspiring philosophy in more than one way.
Well, it's funny because he's also live right now. I didn't even know that he was going to be live right now.
Taking all your viewers.
Yeah, he's taking all of you. You know, what's really funny about that though is because there's like this trifecta thing between like him and Than and me, and we've done stuff and we've been doing things. A lot of people come from there to over to here, and like vice versa. So I mean, yeah, this probably happening in some shape, form, or fashion. But we love Mike, and that's awesome. But we aren't here to talk about Mike. Mike's doing his own thing. Mike can be weird in his own way. What we're going to talk about today, and you can see the title, right, is of course, we're here to give you guys the best materials to defend your faith the right way. And dude, are you Dave now? Are you no longer David?
I go by either.
Okay.
Most people call me Dave, but some close friends still call me David. I'm fine either way.
That's hilarious. Okay, cool. I'm just so used to calling you David, man. But yeah, so what I love about what you do and what I see is I remember when you took this turn in your journey where you were like, there comes a point in time where you get deep enough in this whole apologetics defend your faith thing. And you realize that the chasm between the best ways in which you can represent and actually defend, argue for Christianity, is like just so not even known. Like it's barely known. And the amount of people that are talking about it are just like almost like are quasi / pure academic. And then the amount of material that people see that you see online and defended, you just go, well, it's like once you wake up to it, you can't unsee it. You're like, oh my gosh. But then the problem becomes is you don't want to become that guy who tries to crap on the entire apologetics industry because it's actually helping people. And it was there for us at one point in time when we needed it. So it's like, okay, well, without throwing the whole, baby with the bathwater, how do we level people up in such a way, the right way, where people don't have to become mini academics, mini PhDs? And that's what we're here for. We're here to help you in your worldview journey do that. And Dave, I love what you've done is you call out the bad, but then you expose the good. And that's all I want to do here. So I think, what we can start off with here is just kind of explain your explain what you started, man. Like, how did you even get into this whole thing in the first place? Explain that to us.
Yeah, a little bit of well, probably a little bit of a stereotypical story. So, my father is a pastor of a fundamentalist Baptist church. He's been a pastor of a fundamentalist Baptist church as far back as I can remember. And so, kind of growing up as a pastor's child, I was very sheltered, as you can imagine, right? I was homeschooled. I didn't get a lot of exposure to the outside world. And like the extent of my ability to defend my faith was young earth creationist, answers in Genesis type
Yep.
apologetic material. That was pretty much the extent of how I was going to be able to defend my faith. So when I turned 16, I got my first job, and I was finally away from the constant protection of my parents, and I got out into the real world, and I found out, not everybody agrees with me. And defending some of the things I believed was not necessarily as easy as my dad had made it sound from behind the pulpit. It
Yeah.
wasn't as easy to poke holes in the theory of evolution as maybe I had thought it would be, right? It wasn't just a obvious fact to everyone that the Bible was the 100% inspired, infallible Word of God. So this caused me to go into a pretty severe, faith crisis, I suppose you could call it. And this lasted probably from when I was about 18 through when I was 20. I was trying to, read as much material as I could. But it was a really depressing time for me because these were just not questions I ever expected to have to deal with. I thought I was settled. And, I had my life planned out, right? I was going to go to Bible college, and I was going to
Yeah.
get my degree in pastoral ministry, and I was going to become a pastor of a fundamentalist Baptist church myself. And so this was happening at kind of an inconvenient time in that way for me, because it was disrupting whether I was going to be able to go to the college my parents wanted me to go to, because I had to agree to a statement of faith, which, required me to affirm, among other things, the King James only position, that you could only read the King James version of the Bible. I wasn't at all sure if I could still believe that. I wasn't sure if I could still believe in young earth creationism. And these were certain things I had to affirm to go to this school. And that had just been my life's plan. I was going to go there, graduate, take a church, and pastor it. And now I'm not sure if I believe everything. So it felt problematic at the time. And of course, that's just, an interesting time in everybody's life, because that's when you're kind of becoming yourself anyway. So long story short, I did get to the place that I wasn't able to believe those sorts of things anymore. And that, sent me onto where I became today. But that was sort of where my introduction to apologetics began, I would say. My interest in it started to deepen, because I wanted to find out, is this something I can actually continue to believe, or is that just sort of my parents' thing? They do their thing, I do mine. And I mean, to some extent, it did end up being that, because I don't obviously hold to this brand of Christianity that I was raised with anymore. I wouldn't consider myself a fundamentalist. I'm not a young earth creationist. I'm certainly not a King James onlyist anymore. But in other ways, I have, developed my own robust Christian faith. And it's, authentic to me, because it's the one that I have found to be taught in scripture and best supported on other grounds as well. So that was sort of how I became who I am.
I love it, man. I love it. And we have some comments here. And faith crisis is a canny event for us all. Hey, listen, again, I've done a lot of work on the problem of evil and theodicy and things like that. And man, people don't realize how sometimes what we consider at the time to be the worst things that happen to us can be the best thing that happened to us, even a crisis of faith. Salvation's supposed to be the most obvious thing. No, doubting your salvation can lead to even greater salvation, right? And then doubts happening at inconvenient times is so real. Absolutely. But it becomes the greatest catalyst for journeying inward. Yeah, I love what you're saying there, man. And one of the things I like to remind people is, studying theology and what we can even call a theology journey, it's actually not for the faint of heart. And what's really funny is, in the same way that we're not taught tons of things in school that we think we should, but anyone who thinks that schools are here to teach us real, stuff for life is, well, I can't really help you there. So one of the things that we're not taught in school is, hey, by the way, like thinking about religion, not for the faint of heart. Like studying theology at a deep level involves every aspect of the human experience. It's existential. It's tugs on the soul. It's not just intellectual. And many people are not fit for it. We see a large deconstruction movement right now. And I ask myself this many times because me growing up, we have, I wouldn't say really similar, but similar in some aspects of our growing up. I went to a very fundamentalist church, Calvinist, KJV, YEC, Baptist, etc., and so forth. That's where I was young enough to where I didn't get my theology from anywhere else. And I remember at the time that I was like the only person in my youth level that went home on the internet or like tried to research what the heck I was hearing. Right. And I couldn't talk about it with anybody because I was like, I was gaslighting myself. I was like, everyone else should be like researching. And then what would happen is I would research so much on the outside that I come to church every Sunday with like some new reason to feel like I need to deconstruct what I'm hearing the pastor saying. What ended up happening is I ended up leaving that community eventually because I got to the point as I got older that I held none of the views that they had. But the difference is I didn't leave the faith. You didn't leave the faith, dude. You see, so it's like, why are these people? And what's really weird to me right now is we have people who are like documenting and becoming influencers of their deconstruction journey online. That's so much of religious TikTok is people documenting their deconstruction and doing debates. And I'm going, what is this? This is not glamorous. This is not something you try to make fans about. This is a real human experience, something that you worked through, right? So I don't know why this goes some ways for some people. I've always asked myself, am I cut from a different cloth? Is there a reason why? Because I just felt like every time I did my due diligence and honest research, things were cleared up for me. And there was never a moment in my mind where I needed to give up Jesus Christ. There was never a moment in my mind I needed to give up the church. Why do you think that you didn't go that route as well?
Yeah, there's probably a variety of reasons why. One of them, of course, was undeniably like a strong desire to keep to my Christian faith. And I feel like some people lose that along the way. There's also an aspect, I think, of inundation to it. People just get they acquire so many issues that they don't know how to deal with, that it just creates this looming doubt, and it just crashes down on them, and eventually they give up. And it probably feels like the intellectually honest thing to do to a lot of people. A concern, though, that I have is a lot of people do that without having really given Christianity a fair shot. They haven't necessarily taken the time to understand it. So a lot of people think, for example, that the sort of Christianity they were raised with, and it often tends to be like the very rigid sort of fundamentalism that you and I come from, and I think the denominations are not being helpful, right? Because in my denomination, we thought pretty much anyone who wasn't an independent fundamental Baptist, they were going to hell. Not necessarily everyone, but
Oh, I know it.
Yeah, all the Catholics, they for sure were, right? The Orthodox, they for sure were. Most of the mainline Protestants, they for sure were. Basically, very, very few people were actually not going to hell on the type of Christianity I was raised in. And I get the same feeling with a lot of other people. I just listen to a lot of debates, and people are the skeptic is assuming that Christianity is married to everything that the Bible says and everything that their particular interpretation of the Bible dictates, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so one thing that was helpful for me is I realized very early on that there is a distinction between essential and non-essential doctrines. And so Christianity can be, pretty slimmed down to, what exactly you want to make the exact definitions, a little controversial, but something like the Nicene Creed, right? A very small number of propositions you can believe that don't involve the inerrancy of the Bible, right? And so that was helpful to me because it allowed, and it continues to be helpful to me, because I don't have to feel because I encounter an objection to, say, my particular view of origins, that all of a sudden my whole Christian faith comes into, question, right? I can have a little bit of leeway on the issue of origins. or maybe there's a particular issue with the Bible, right? Seems like maybe there's a contradiction in the Bible, and I don't know how to deal with that. Well, understanding that I don't actually have to believe in the inerrancy of the Bible in order to be a Christian, that takes some of the pressure off of that. It's like, okay, that's an issue to look into, right? Maybe I'll have to revise my views on this, but I can kind of put that on the shelf, right? And so, to kind of use a cliche, it can help you make the main thing, right? You can
Yep.
put the essential issues of Christianity and get a good foundation there, and then kind of work your way out from there. So I think grasping that distinction early on was helpful, particularly realizing I didn't have to affirm the inerrancy or even necessarily the inspiration of the Bible to be a Christian.
Yep.
It took a lot of objections and made them less pressing, because it wasn't like, if the objection holds, then I have to abandon Christianity. It was more like, if that holds, then I'll have to modify my view of Christianity, but I don't have to get laser focused on every single, little contradiction in the Bible in order to retain my Christian faith. So that was helpful.
Yeah, I love that. And one of the things that I actually teach my students is something I'm dubbing the openness principle. And it's a procedure that I found myself, it's like a framework really that I found myself operating within, when just like subconsciously just going about doing this myself. And essentially what it does is it allows you to maintain the most minimal core content of a proposition. Let's just take a doctrine, and then allowing yourself to leave open all the specifics about that doctrine. So let's just take the Trinity, for example. Okay. If we were to reduce the Trinity down to its most minimal content, where we're just only saying what needs to be essentially said and leaving open everything else, I would say that the Trinity is tripersonal monotheism. It's the doctrine that attempts to explain tripersonal monotheism. Now, then above that, the level above that is it a Latin model? Is it a social model? Is it a monarchical model? But what people do is they think that if you're going to hold to the Trinity, you need to understand both, or else you're being dishonest and you're not being a truth seeker. And I'm going, who told you that? Yes, I can have reasons to hold to a tripersonal monotheism and then leave open what I think all of the mechanics around that are. I can leave open my opinion on what it means to have a substance, have a nature. I can leave open to what I think it means when I identify the persons as being identical to the divine nature. Even my opinion on identity relations, I can leave open. Things like that, which are essential to these debates about these particular models of the Trinity. And so I call it the openness principle. And this is actually something that philosophers do. It's like, hey, we can minimally hold to this proposition, and then we can leave open what we think about these other things, right? And so we don't need to have a hard stance. And everyone thinks, if I don't have, not everyone, but a lot of people think that are doing this. And I think it's just because, and this is why I have you here today, I think it's just because they lack the training or the systems to know that, listen, there are actual reliable frameworks and principles and methods that you can adopt that can lead you in the right direction, that can lead you to clarity. Clarity isn't something that happens by random chance. Clarity is actually something that you can achieve by just knowing exactly how to conduct an investigation. And one of the things that we use to do that is called epistemology, right? It's one of the core foundations. If you take any philosophy class, you're going to learn epistemology. You can literally go online right now. Everyone listening, you can literally go on right now, go to the Stanford Encyclopedia Philosophy entry on epistemology, and you can start reading side by side. But the first thing before I say that is I want to put in the chat here, listen, if you, wherever you're at in your journey, I just put the form to fill out. Contact me, because I want to help as many people as possible. I want to put together you a success plan to help you move forward and advance to the next level of your apologetics journey. Either getting clear on an objection, getting clear on an argument you're making, or if you're still figuring out exactly how to get clarity and actually implement with certainty everything that David and I are saying, go fill out the form. I'd love to meet you. I'd love to put a plan in place, get you going, get you started, not have you take years to do it, but we can do it in months. Anyway, that being said,
can I give a brief blurb for that too?
What'd you say?
Can I give you a brief blurb as well?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because I mean, I've known you for I mean, what is it, 5, 6 years now? I mean, I think we met was it part of the Apologetics Youth Empire that Kyle Allender put together at
Oh
one point?
man, that
I
brings me back.
I
Brings
think
me
that was how we met. I could be wrong about that, but point being, like, I from the time we first met, I could tell that like you had the special gift that you had, not just like the knowledge and the drive, but you also had like the passion and the ability to connect with people, and like that's where I fall short, right? Because I mean, I'm an ornery, stubborn guy. I don't necessarily have the people skills, but see, you have that, right? So I think that you would absolutely be a great mentor for people, just from having known you, seeing you grow over the past several
Thank you,
years.
brother. Thank you,
And
bro.
so, yeah, I mean, I would definitely recommend that people accept you as their sort of tutor or mentor, or whatever term you prefer to use there, because I know you'd be a great guy for that.
Thank you, brother. Thank you, brother. And guys, I did not pay Dave to do any of that. That is on his volition. So right there, that's the biggest testimonial I can have. So Dave, thank you so much for saying that. I really appreciate that, brother. So even more onus on you guys to go fill out that form. Get it started, man. You can learn all this today. And again, I teach a model. It's called FFP, Frameworks First Principles. And it is opposition to the model that the church uses, or we even see mainly on the internet, which is the repeat apologetics model. And that model, Dave, you know this, bro. You take some apologist or theologian or spokesperson, they have an argument that they think works. They utter the argument. They have their little story. Everyone goes, "Oh, that's the greatest way to address this objection over here." Someone out of nowhere has a nuanced point that person's never heard before, and what are they left with? Nothing. Whereas the FFP model teaches you that all answers, all counter objections stem from frameworks of thought. They stem from frameworks you use to investigate the truth of any belief. And so if you're a Christian, you should have mastery over your beliefs. That means you should know exactly how you're arriving at them, which is you should know the tools, principles, and frameworks that you use to get there. And that brings me to my next question, which is, Dave, when did you realize you needed more? Okay, so you went through that whole process. When did you start to get into, because not everybody gets into the academic side. By the way, I didn't even touch on the fact, you guys, the audience got to know this. This dude is crazy at reading. Like, people think I'm crazy when it comes to reading because I have like every PDF on everything. But like, this guy is crazy when it comes to reading. I need to have you on just to do like a reading seminar in my academy, dude. Like, to just teach people how to do that. Touch on that, man. Like, how did you get into that? Because a lot of people don't get there.
Yeah, I have a little bit of a book addiction, which is why I'm told I'm an expensive friend. Yeah, I'm told I'm an expensive friend to have, because I, post so much about the books I'm reading, and then people want to go get them. So, yeah, there is that. Part of it is that I think I just have a natural ability to read fast that I get from my mom. My mom is a voracious reader. My father is really not. So some of it might just be genetic in that regard. Some of it's just the drive. I'm a very curious person. I like to know, and I'm also a very pragmatic person. So I like what works. And what I've found is that what works the best for me to, know the things that I want to know, or get the answer to my questions, satisfying answers to my questions, is generally to read what the best minds have had to say about the matter. And that generally, writing is just kind of the gold standard for how people can express their thoughts. And so reading the writings of, great minds has been what I've pragmatically found to be the best way to satisfy my curiosity. So it's kind of the conjunction of my curiosity and my pragmatism that's led me to be a voracious reader.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, man. For me, dude, I don't even know. Something snapped at me one day when it came to reading, which is once I recognized that there was relevance to what I was reading. So I remember reading the Blackwell Companion to Natural Theology for the first time, and no one had to force me to read that book. Okay, so if no one knows what the Blackwell Companion to Natural Theology is, it's like the first book you find when you're really. Oh, I think the man's got it. Yeah, you got it. Oh wow, that was quick. Boom. Literally, that book right there, the image of that book right there is like imprinted in my brain forever. if you're never gone deep into natural theology and you find that book, you feel like you found the Holy Grail. Like, you feel like there's no way. I remember when I found that book, I was like, there's no way atheism has anything. Like, that's remember how I felt. There's no way any other religion has anything on this book. And it's pretty much just a compilation of essays from really astute scholars in the field of philosophy of religion, basically putting forth arguments for existence of God. And no one had to force me to read that book. Like, legitimately, I was so motivated. I would read like 60 pages a day. I remember one time I read through Craig and Sinclair's essay on the Kalam cosmological argument in that book. I read it in one sitting. You know what ended up happening to me that night? I ended up having weird dreams because I was reading about phantom energy, and I was learning about geodesics for the first time. I was learning about these bounce models, and I remember just having strange dreams that night, just very abstract dreams. And I'm like, that's what happens when I read that, whole section in one sitting. But like, no one had to force me. And I'm going, well, why is that? But then there are certain situations where, man, some books are a slog. You know that some books you're just like, okay, I like the information here, but man, the way this guy writes, can we get some more white space in the pages? Like, you know what I'm saying? And sometimes it's like that. But for me, if the relevance is towards something I am doing, so if it's a research project, that can be enough relevance for me to attach my reading activity to, where then I go, okay, I'm motivated again to just like push through and maybe do 30 pages today or 40 pages today. Or for me, the main thing is it's actually really become an act of worship where I feel like I'm understanding more aspects about God as I read more things written about God, which is essentially what I'm doing. And so then it becomes that much more effortless, you could say. So go ahead.
Well, yeah, I would say that's an aspect of worship, actually, that I think is overlooked, worshiping God with your mind, even though actually the Bible does specifically command us to love God with all of our mind. This is something that I think Christianity in general, and of course the brand that you and I came from in particular, grossly overlooks. Like, I knew the verse that I was supposed to love God with my mind, but I never even dawned on me to think what that actually means or entails, because it was never expanded upon, because I came from a denomination that didn't like you to be thinking about things too hard, because then you might have questions and leave the denomination. So but sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. That was just a good thought.
No, all good. Yeah, no, I just wanted you to touch on like when you found yourself going much more inward and getting into the deeper parts of the apologetics / philosophy.
Yeah. Well, I think you brought up something interesting before, is that kind of a lot of Christians, myself included, and I'm assuming probably you too, our introduction to philosophy comes through apologetics or philosophy of religion, because we're kind of curious about some of the questions of beliefs that are maybe initially like very important to us, like does God exist, things like that. And so an issue there is that philosophy of religion is kind of a intersection for so many other fields of philosophy. And so when you begin there, some issues can arise. Like, for example, if you're a fan of like Craig's traditional Kalam cosmological argument, initially it might sound great, and then you find out, oh, it relies on a controversial theory of time, but I like this argument, so like I'm already biased towards a theory of time, right? Like, I have to come out in favor of this view if I want to keep this argument. Oh, I like the moral argument for theism. That has an intersection with ethics. I have to be a moral realist. Oh, I have to be a non-naturalist moral realist. Oh, I have to arguably be a divine command theorist, right? So one issue is that kind of apologetics is not sensitive to all of this background knowledge that you really need to assess these issues. And so there's this kind of like moving backwards that tends to happen. And I mean, I did it. I definitely did it for sure. I had to work my way backwards to the foundations. And when I started seeing the inadequacy of what I'd call popular Christian apologetics, is sort of its inability for you to really go beyond the surface or beyond like the sort of stock arguments that they could give in support of these premises. And if you like really wanted to know why, you kind of would hit a wall pretty fast. I think particularly for me, it came when there was this over-reliance on self-refutation and self-defeat. And I mean, most popular Christian apologists, they don't even know the distinction between a self-refutation and a self-defeat. Like, they will use those terms interchangeably when, and for people who are maybe curious. Self-refuting is something like a contradiction. It's like a position that is asserting two things that can't both be true at the same time. That's a self-refutation. Self-defeating, and a self-refuting position cannot be true. A self-defeating position is when there's something in there that implies that there's no way you can rationally believe the position, which doesn't mean that it's false, by the way. A self-defeating position can theoretically be true. There's just no way to be justified in believing it to be true. And like this sort of distinction, they just didn't care about that. So it was an over-reliance on these sorts of things. So I really started out in apologetics. Well, I shouldn't say started out, but early on I became familiar with the writings of Norman Geisler. Yeah. And I read his book, Christian Apologetics, which is probably the best book he ever wrote. But he had a chapter in there on formulating an adequate test for truth. And this was kind of where my interest in epistemology started, because I was so fascinated by this idea that the foundation of knowledge is like these necessary truths that can't be denied on pain of a self-defeat issue. And so I thought that meant, okay, that means they're necessarily true. And I think a lot of presuppositionalists are also fascinated with this line of defense, but maybe for Christianity, they think the denial of it sort of entails the truth of it. And so there's no way to rationally deny it. I was fascinated with those sorts of things, but I found out pretty fast it's also pretty easy to sort of reformulate a position to avoid those sorts of things. So you usually have to be very, I found out dialetheism's the thing, right? If I'm saying that the law of non-contradiction is false, that's not necessarily going to commit me to saying that, absolutely every contradiction is true, right? Maybe I could just think some contradictions are true. And, sorry to go down the nerd rabbit hole there on that, but I found this over-reliance on these sorts of things. We have this evolutionary argument against naturalism. Oh, naturalism's self-defeating, right? We have an argument from reason. Atheism is self-defeating. Frank Turek loves to make these arguments in his book, Stealing from God. And I was really taken with them at first, but I just kind of came to see that they're really bad. It's actually very easy to avoid them. And popular apologetics, they can't go deeper than that. And so that was kind of when I realized, all right, if I really want satisfying answers to my questions of where do we actually start in building an argument to begin with, I'm going to have to go deeper than popular Christian apologetics.
Yeah, I love that. And what's beautiful about the internet is there are actual spaces for that. And for everyone listening right now, I know that it's, I guess, I probably have a younger audience, so you might not use Facebook, but listen, there are things called Facebook groups. We might be going back a little bit on this, but there are things called Facebook groups. And the beautiful thing about these is some of the greatest living Christian thinkers are active in these groups. Dave, you and I are active in these groups. And a lot of the times you guys are searching in the wrong places for your answers. And literally, right now, if I wanted to, if I had a question, I could literally at everyone in one of these Facebook groups. And I would be contacting PhDs in a second to weigh in on a particular argument. There are actual places refuge. I feel like you and I, we could be called refugees, because it's okay, well, popular apologetics didn't do it for us. Where do we go? Where do we land on? And there's just a few pockets of the internet that can really actually help us. And so I feel like those are some of those places. Other places, we have some other kind of channels that are semi-popular that do it. But ultimately, right, that's kind of how you feel a little bit, which is okay, well, I need to go deeper somehow. Where do I go next? Right. And I feel like there's different kind of levels of going deeper in that way, which is at the top is super academic. You found a dissertation that needs to be translated into English from German that no one, 5 people have read, to oh, okay, this one scholar was on a podcast. I'm going to listen to that podcast or something like that. And those have always been really, really helpful. Really, really great. So no, man, I appreciate you weighing in on that. Well, how do you view, because apologetics is a very, it can be a pejorative term sometimes, depending on the internet. We've seen the worst of the worst when it comes to how some people view apologetics. I've had some people come in my streams, right, who just like, you'd think I blew up their whole family. I don't know. I don't know what I did. I say the word apologetics and I'm a terrible person. So how do you view apologetics now that you've gone on the other side?
Yeah, so apologetics is, of course, a spectrum, right? It is the defense of the faith. And within that, you can have people who do it very well, and you can have people who do an abysmal job at it. And so it's probably not going to be helpful to view it in this binary of is it good or is it bad?
Right.
In general, I think the practice is a good thing, but it can be done in a good way, and it can be done in a, absolutely terrible way. So broadly, that's my view on it. I'm okay with keeping the apologetics label, but I mean, I realize there's certain contexts where it's not necessarily going to be helpful. For example, in the context of like biblical studies, if I use the word apologetics, I know there's a certain portion of the audience, their eyes are going to glaze over and they're just going to tune out anything I have to say at that point. So I might try to avoid it in that context just because I want people to continue to listen to me. And I don't think that what I'm doing is like what they have in mind with the sort of negative connotations. A issue, I think, is just a lot of people define it. And this came out in a podcast Inspiring Philosophy did recently. I don't remember the gentleman's name, but one of the first questions he asked him was sort of like,
oh, I think I know this one.
It was something like apologetics is like inherently dishonest or something.
Yeah,
like
I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah. And the way he defines it is like, well, you start with your conclusion and then you go to find something to like justify it. And like people can do that. And like that doesn't mean that it's bad. But like fundamentally, it doesn't have to be done that way. It's like any other proposition that you would defend, except these happen to be religious or Christian propositions. And like, I'm going to, in principle, defend them the way I would defend any other proposition that I believe, right? Like, there's nothing dishonest about that. So, to some extent, I think, you got to be careful about how exactly people are understanding the term as well.
Yeah, totally. An audience in the chat, give you kind of your opinion. Where are you at with apologetics? Where are you at specifically in your journey right now? Would you say you're a beginner? Would you say you're advanced? Are you done with apologetics? Do you think that apologetics is in opposition to philosophy? Are those two different things? Put in the chat right now while we're talking. I want to actually put something up here on the screen. You talked about starting with your conclusion and justifying it. You know what's really funny is I want to share this real fast because this is going to be interesting. So let's see. Check this out here. Okay, let's see if this pops up. All right, you see this paper?
I see it, but I can't really read it.
What about now?
That's better.
All right, how's that look? Okay, it's called How to Never Be Wrong. Literally, this is an epistemology paper, okay, by Samuel Gershom. And this is a Bayesian model of how to how to hold beliefs in the face of disconfirmation in a way that is valid according to Bayesian epistemology. This is actually one of the best papers I've ever read on the topic, and you can actually learn a lot on just how Bayesian epistemology works here in the most up-to-date form of where the field is at. But it's called How to Never Be Wrong. And this paper is literally about when you are actually in your rational rights to hold on to a belief, that you have, and then come up with hypotheses that will block reasons to believe it's not true. Okay, so there's literally a paper called How to Never Be Wrong. I love the title of the paper because it's not about us wanting to cling on to the thing that makes us psychologically feel good, the opium, the copium that they say that we have. But like legitimately, there are legitimate epistemologically valid means to which you can do that, right? And for me, I just like people make this so complicated. It's like either there's outweighing justification in a sea of competing theories, or there's not. Like it doesn't matter where in the timeline I temporally, got the belief. You know what I'm saying? Oh my gosh, yeah. I can go onto that. But go ahead.
It's related to a common objection we hear, and not so much in like the philosophy of religion space where people are a little like more tuned to like logical validity and like when something's actually a fallacy. But certainly in the realm of like biblical studies, when like we're doing apologetics on that front, and like we're dealing with people like, you know, Dan McKellen and people
Oh yeah.
who want to like dismiss anything an apologist or a conservative scholar says on the basis of like bias. Like, I can dismiss what you say if you're biased. And like, sorry, you can't. It's not about whether you're biased or not. It's about whether the argument I'm giving supports the proposition or not. I can be biased as all heck, and the argument can still support the proposition. Show me where the argument goes wrong, please. Like, don't talk about my bias, because that's completely irrelevant. It's just an ad hominem.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What's funny about bias, right, is that there are so many human biases, and a lot of them don't even have to do with like anything that's truth tracking. Like there are biases that have nothing to do with getting in the way of like you being able to find the evidence or the truth. I remember I made a video on this one time and you actually endorsed it, where I later talked about that. I'm like, yeah, like whether an argument is sound, whether a belief is justified, has nothing to do with your psychology. Has zero to do with your psychology. And people just like, I committed treason against the state practically if you looked at that comment section. The weird developer. You say, I've always thought of philosophers as apologists in some sense. Philosophers provide reasons for why they hold certain models of reality are true. Well, of course, if we think that the root word, the etymology of the term to give an apology, to give a defense, right? Okay, you're being questioned, hey, give me the reasons for what you believe. If that's what we mean, right, then absolutely. Then there's the apologetics TM. Somehow this $1 billion industry people think that we're all trying to live off of, which is not really working out. If someone can explain to me how to make that work out, I'd love that. But yeah, no, I love that. Okay. And then I want to move on to some general epistemology stuff. I want to hear, bro, bring us into your mind. Really tell us, what is your general procedure for getting answers, for getting clarity around any kind of personal questions or like subject matter interest that you have? Kind of walk us through that. Maybe use a case example of like when you had a subject matter interest that you researched, you didn't have a lot of clarity in the beginning, but you had a lot at the end, more than something you ever thought. Kind of let us in on that. What frameworks and principles do you use for that?
Yeah, so when I'm about to embark on a research project, obviously I'm going to be reading a lot of books. That's the method. Is there's not really a substitute for reading. You can listen to things and stuff, and I mean, I've learned things that way. But at least for myself, I learn the best from a book. You know, if I misunderstand something or I didn't quite get it, I can go back and read it again. That's just the best method.
So a lot of this hinges on basically you finding some kind of text that you could just delve right into.
That's absolutely my preferred way to investigate something, if possible. Now, the selection is, well, so first of all, I want to get as clear as possible on like, what is the topic, right? Because the more you can sort of specify what exactly it is, the more you can get literature that more specifically targets that, right? So like so for example, when I was really like beginning my studies in epistemology, I was interested in a notion I'm sure we'll get to later, known as epistemic justification, right? And particularly, what is the epistemic justification of basic or foundational beliefs? I did not know at the time how to express it that way, right? I didn't know the terminology. So I was, I spent a lot of time looking like in philosophical foundations for a Christian worldview, for example.
Yeah.
The answers to that question. Because like the title of the book sounded like kind of what I was looking for, right? But and it's not to say it didn't touch on that at all, but it didn't really give me what I was looking for either. So be as like precise as you can in getting like the specific issue that you actually want to look at. So get the most amount of, and that can, change as your studies progress. You might find out that you're actually like running 3 or 4 different things together, and you might have to chase down 2 of them or all of them. So, and another thing would be categorized by order of importance. So if you find out that like an issue that you want to study is related to others, sort of find out what the logical structure is there and plan your studies accordingly. So like if your conclusions in, this particular study, like say, is the Kalam cosmological argument sound? If that's going to depend, like if your conclusions there are going to depend on what theory of time you adopt, study which theory of time you're going to adopt first, right? Don't get conclusions on other things before that. So yeah, order your study. And then from there, I kind of look for 3 categories of books. I look for something introductory to give me an overview of it, something to kind of bridge me over. And sometimes it's not going to be just one. Sometimes you hit a bad introductory text. So, you might need 2 or 3, but find something introductory, something to bridge you over, and pay attention as you're reading those, to the footnotes, to the end notes. Find out who's being cited, who are the big dogs, who are like the people that I need to cite, that I need to be reading for this issue. Get yourself bridged over to the more academic material, and then just stockpile the people that you need to read and, read through it. That's generally my procedure when I want to study a topic. I get myself introduced, situated, figure out who I need to be reading, bridge myself to the more academic material, and then read through the academic material. I really wish, and this is probably one of the most important points I can make, because this held me back for so long. I thought there was a huge chasm between popular, apologetic material or popular books written for popular audiences and academic books. By and large, that is not the case. When I actually dipped my toes in and started actually reading academic books that I thought these are going to be way over my head and I can't understand these, they weren't as bad as I thought. That's a point I can't emphasize enough, because I wish I'd known that sooner. I would have moved on from popular apologetics so much sooner if I knew that I could. I was under this assumption that, it's published by Oxford University Press. That's for PhDs. I can't understand that stuff.
Exactly.
Most of the time I can. And even when there's symbolic logic or something in there that, I don't necessarily read or don't understand the best, you can usually skip that stuff, skip a chapter or something, and still get the general flow. So that's, in broad strokes, that's the mechanics of my sort of study process.
I love that. Clean, concise, to the point. It sounds streamlined. I have a sub question. We both love the McGrews. It's almost like they've done charity for how much value they've contributed, for how much publicity they actually have. But I want to get your opinion. I remember one time Lydia McGrew said something, and I don't want to butcher her. So if she ever sees this and I misrepresented it, well, I know for a fact she'll call me out for it, because that's what she does. And she one time said something like, evidential apologetics isn't for everyone. And there's a certain, the way that she was articulating, at least my impression of it was, there's a certain onus on the person, a certain responsibility on the person for having to deal with evidence in such a accurate manner that a lot of people just kind of are not up for the task. Some people just kind of jump into things, and she just doesn't think that everyone can just pick up a book and they should just start, investigating these claims and everything like that. And I remember thinking I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. That just because it's evidential, all of a sudden it's a whole other beast than just normal kind of human inquiry. Based on my impression of what she's saying, what do you make of that?
Yeah, I would say I'm not sure if I'm remembering the exact example that you're speaking about, but might I suggest that what she's talking about is sort of the public defender of Christianity versus the average person? Because I'm sure Lydia McGrew is not going to say that the average person isn't supposed to be an evidentialist. Of course, she believes that everyone should be an evidentialist. And of course, we recognize that there are different categories of evidence, right? So you can be rationally justified in believing something, because your parents told you so, That's not necessarily going to be the strongest form of justification. That might prove inadequate at a certain point in your life. But, as a child, I think generally children have justified beliefs based on what their parents tell them, because they've got some inductive body of evidence that their parents are typically reliable sources. Speaking for most kids, I'm sure there are terrible parents that are an exception there, but you get the point. So perhaps what Lydia's talking about there would be like the public defender of Christianity, like basically someone who is not willing to take the time to invest the time into actually studying the evidence
Uh-oh.
of Christianity publicly.
Oh, wait, hold on. I lost you for a second there.
Am I back?
Okay, wait, speak again. Uh-oh. We're losing everybody. We're losing them. We'll give them a few seconds to get back here.
Am I in?
Okay, you're in. Yep.
Okay. Sorry, where did I cut off?
Yeah, just run it back the last 10 seconds. I think you just went into like what do you think she's saying.
I was saying, so instead of saying that like
Satan is not wanting this to be said. Give him a few minutes to come back.
am I back?
Okay, you are back.
Okay, we try it one more
Whatever it is, do not repeat that same line of words. It is not like that. But no, you look good now. You sound good now. Everything's synced up. Look, third time's a charm.
time. Or 3 strikes and you're out. But yeah, I was. Am I cutting out again?
No, you're good.
Okay, yeah, I was saying. I think Lydia probably just means that the public defender of Christianity needs to be willing to take the time to rigorously understand the evidential case for Christianity, and that you don't really have any business making the case for Christianity if you're not willing to put the research in. Does that make sense?
I like that. I can stand behind that. Yeah, and honestly, principle of charity here, knowing she's done, I would say that's probably a much more fair take than what I was saying. And I hope that's the case. I hope this. I will enact hopeful optimism on that one. No, that is good. And I think so as well, man. I think pretty much. Oh, we got another guy, amateur philosopher. Pallmann is the man
With
Double
2
M.
ends.
Exactly. Pallmann's the man. Yes, sir. That's why he's here today. Only the best. Come on. So yeah, man. I think a big part of that is, I think a big harm is overstating the case. I was actually talking to my dad about this the other day. I was telling him that, a lot of Christians are not taught in the church that there's such a thing as like something like Jewish midrash, and they're taught that all what is it? The relationship between the prophecies in the Old Testament and the fulfillment of those in the New Testament about Jesus Christ are a one-to-one correspondence.
It's always got to be like straightforward, predictive prophecy, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I was telling my dad about this, and he never heard of like something like Jewish midrash. He's been in church all his life, and I was like, yeah, no, like imagine you are an apologist, you go out and saying, oh yeah, these prophecies are all fulfilled, one-to-one correspondence, and it's not that the prophecies aren't fulfilled, right? But the way in which you're stating the case, such that all it takes is if someone comes across evidence that doesn't frame in the way that they were taught by that person, they're going to confuse that with the entire ball of the game. And that's happened to so many people. I think overstating the case is a powerfully dangerous tool, right? And so I think that when you do understand the evidence properly, it can actually prevent that from happening.
The other unfortunate thing, too, is that always understanding prophecy as like it always has to be straightforward, predictive prophecy, you miss out on what I think is one of the most interesting arguments for the historical trustworthiness of the New Testament Gospels and for Acts, namely that they do sometimes like force fit prophecy and fulfillment together. And it's like not clear why they would be doing that if the events they're reporting are not historical. Because like if they feel like they can just, if the gospel stories are basically made up and they can twist and turn it however they want, there's no reason at all you can't have these smooth fulfillments. That we've got like John saying that Jesus being offered vinegar on the cross, he's connecting that to something in the Psalms where it says he's being poisoned. There are so many better ways, like if you're making up the story, to have somebody try to poison Jesus. So the kind of awkward, forced nature of these suggests that like the gospel authors are working with one hand tied. They're constraining themselves to the facts of history, and that's what best accounts for the kind of clunky fits between the Old and New Testament. You can't have any of that if you think prophecy always has to consist of straightforward predictive prophecy that's fulfilled one-to-one.
Yeah, if they're being honest with the text, that data is putty in the hands of just reliability of gospel authorship. Absolutely, man. Yeah, unless you engage in some weird recursive perspective, like social inference, where they're like, oh, they specifically did that because they know that people reading it later down the line would know that's a marker of trustworthiness, so they did that on purpose so that we would believe it. And like, okay, what are we doing? You know what I'm saying? Like that's a terrible hypothesis. Let's not do that. But some people want to put that forth. Nice, man. Well, I love your procedure. Okay, well, let's talk about beliefs in general. You talk about epistemic justification, which is the central concept here, right? And everyone listening, like, if you have epistemic justification down, you know where you land on that. That's half the battle done for you. So let's just take a belief in general, okay? And let's say that someone were to, you just had a really awesome, and I'm going to be having him on actually here pretty soon. Eric Van Evans, I'm going to be having him on, and he and you went back and forth on, the resurrection. And by the way, I think you did very good. And I like Eric because he's very respectful. I like the fact that, hey, it's not every once in a while you actually see an honest philosophical theist just coming toeing the line on some interesting stuff. So I want you to kind of in real time here, kind of show what the procedure looks like to, let's take a proposition, right? Let's just say that the resurrection can be explained away, right, by some kind of combination hypothesis. These were just, they had the disciples, they were being honest about their appearances, about the resurrection, but they were just misappearances at the end of the day. How would you investigate that?
Yeah, so I am a hardcore evidentialist. So any proposition, if I'm evaluating the truth of it, I want to know what is the evidence. And I pretty much just define evidence as that which either guarantees or renders more probable the truth of a proposition. So basically, what are the facts that could be marshaled in support of this proposition, which would indicate that it's true? So obviously, when we're talking about an empirical hypothesis, like the resurrection of Jesus, there's always going to be an issue with sort of underdetermination, namely that you can come up with any hypothesis that will explain the evidence, right? This is what young Earth creationists do with the evidence for, say, the old Earth. They come up with these like wild hypotheses or just a whole bunch of auxiliary hypotheses that can explain the evidence, right? Explain how it's possible for all these facts to be true and to still have a young Earth. Well, of course, skeptics can do the same thing with the resurrection of Jesus, right? James Fodor, for example, I think is one of the best attempts at doing this. He thinks that like the Joseph of Arimathea took Jesus's body out of the tomb and reburied it because he had pressure from his family or whatever to get Jesus out of his family tomb. So that's how he accounts for the empty tomb. And then he thinks that the disciples had hallucinations of Jesus, and then this kind of got distorted over time in their memories to what we get in the Gospels, right? So we're kind of combining a whole bunch of things together there.
Yeah.
So kind of when you run into that issue, we look at things in broader terms and compare the different theories by reference to what's sometimes called theoretical virtues.
Yep.
Or maybe epistemic principles would be another
rational synonym. Principles.
Yep. And so there's a whole bunch of them, right? So things like simplicity or parsimony, things like the degree of ad hocness, how well does it fit with our background knowledge, what's the explanatory power, scope, yada, 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 right? So basically what I argue is that an explanation like Fodor's does not actually work.
Uh-oh. Don't mention Fodor or else the spirit.
Am I back?
You're back.
Man.
You said something like Fodor's and that's where you cut off.
I see. Is it my internet? Because it's saying my internet is good on this end.
It's saying that my internet's good as well. So
I don't
I
know.
don't know who's to blame, but
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Begone Satan, absolutely, and the photo freeze. It's happening many times today where we're just the value of today's stream is too fire. It's too peak. That's what's happening. I'm gonna take another drink.
So, yeah. So
Go
basically,
ahead,
what
Adam.
I would argue is that these sort of rival hypotheses, while they might adequately explain all the evidence, they don't do so as well as the resurrection hypothesis when assessed by the criteria of a best explanation.
Yeah, I love that. So let me just play back what you said. You're an evidentialist, and you're just like Hume in every way, right? But hey, we can take something from Hume, right? The wise man. What does the wise man do? The wise man apportions his confidence to the evidence, right? To the evidence. Okay. And then what is evidence, right? That which renders a proposition more probable than it otherwise was, or like you said, or guarantees its probable truth. Okay. Great. Perfect. By the way, for everyone listening, that is called the positive relevance theory of confirmation. So if you want to delve into that, because someone like me, right, I love to hear these things so I can go Google it myself. You can go Google that. We're not making this up. The positive relevance theory of evidence. Okay. And then you say, hey, then we have this set of criteria that we could say these are rational principles. These are the kind of the boxes we check off for being able to identify what we could call maybe like good making features or traits of an explanation. And let's say if we have, hypothesis 1, hypothesis 2, if hypothesis 1 meets those criteria better than hypothesis 2, well, hey, there you go. That's what we got. And then we update and error correct if we need to as time goes on. Do I have you correct there?
Yes. Described it perfectly and more eloquently than I'm sure I did.
No, man. This stuff is simple. But people think that it's not like this. And it's kind of funny because I have a set of questions that are actually kind of targets this. We'll get into that in a little bit there. But I kind of want to move on to the next step. Actually, I want you to address this. I'd use the resurrection as just like an example, but like, why not believe that the resurrection can be explained by hallucinations, and that was the only, like, we've never seen a hallucination of that type ever in history again, but it happened to be true there.
Yeah, so that's the very definition of an ad hoc hypothesis, right? Typically, you want to reduce the ad hocness of your hypothesis. Further issues, of course, is going to be the empty tomb, right? If you're going to say that the testimony we have in the Gospels, this is what the disciples really believed happened, but they're mistaken by hallucinations. Big problem there. They believe there's an empty tomb that they went to go see. So unless we're like really, really ratcheting up hallucinations, you have an empty tomb factor to deal with. So you are going to lose grounds on simplicity because you're going to have to conjoin this hallucination hypothesis with, some explanation for the empty tomb, which is not going to be particularly likely either. As for what are the type of hallucinations we're dealing with here, right? These are polymodal in nature, which means that you are, not just seeing Jesus, but, they're touching him, they're eating food with him, they're interacting with him over a period of, 40 days, I might add. So issues from what we kind of know about hallucinations render this unlikely. Because while hallucinations, like bereavement hallucinations, they're somewhat common, but they're pretty well restricted to like visual hallucinations. And another issue, of course, is how did they come to believe that this was the resurrection? Because hallucinations are almost always interpreted either as hallucinations or as like communications of the deceased from beyond the grave. They're not typically like believed to be that the person resurrected. But sorry, returning to the issue of polymodality, it's extremely rare that you're going to have a hallucination that involves a tactile component. It's extremely rare that you're going to have a hallucination where you can like actually taste food, right? And I don't think there's any example where it lasts exactly 40 days and then it's just over. Then, of course, there's a group aspect to this, right? There aren't really such things as group hallucinations. There are we can refer to group hallucinations as, you know, a bunch of people having very similar hallucinations. There are arguably examples of that, although you could argue those are better identified as cases of misidentification or of illusion, but put that to the side. The big issue is that hallucinations, by the nature of what they are, is that they're subjective. So you're not really going to get agreement on certain details if you have a whole bunch of people having a very similar hallucination. Plus, the odds against this are just astronomical. You can bring up like the issue of the disciples' prior mental state, particularly somebody like Thomas, who has no level of expectation that they're going to experience the risen Jesus. And typically, I don't think that this is even what the hallucination hypothesis is meant to explain. There's actually an interesting review of the McGrew's Blackwell Companion article by a skeptic. I believe his name is Aaron Lucas. I think he's on Infidels. He wrote a review of that chapter. And he's like, well, yeah, if you think that, you know, the experiences are like they're described in the Gospels, then like, of course, hallucinations can't explain that. But, you know, we're just positing these in like response to the minimal facts argument, where the minimal fact is just, well, people saw Jesus in some sense, but we're leaving like the nature of those experiences unspecified. So, I mean, I don't even really think that like hallucinations are being put forward to explain the sort of resurrection argument I would make, which kind of takes as a premise that the testimony in the Gospels is an accurate reflection of what the disciples are actually claiming to have seen.
I love that. I love that. Super succinct. Thank you for saying that. That was actually very easy to follow as well. I want to ask you this. Why should Christians in particular care about epistemology? I've actually been getting a lot of people on my platform saying, hey, we'd love to hear you talk more about epistemology. To a lot of people, this is a very new subject. It's a strange word, epistemology, right? We don't use it in normal everyday speak, right? We don't say pass me the epistemology, right? So like what's going on here? Why should Christians care?
Maybe we should define the term real quick, right? So when we're talking about epistemology, we're not talking about a word that, like, you know, you'd find on the inside of a bathroom stall or something like that. Like what we're talking about is the theory or the study of knowledge, basically. And so this is going to deal with things such as what is knowledge, right? The analysis of knowledge, what is the scope of knowledge, what are the sources of knowledge, what are the different types of knowledge. These are all things knowledge related are going to be lumped under the field of epistemology. And so why I think this is important for Christians, particularly those interested in defending the faith, is that you are attempting to offer epistemic justification for your Christian beliefs. So knowing sort of where you land in epistemology is going to dictate so much of how your defense of Christianity plays out. So, for example, I cannot use the evolutionary argument against naturalism because of certain epistemological commitments that I have, right? I am a hardcore internalist. I reject reliability requirements on knowledge. That means I can't use Plantinga's evolutionary argument against naturalism because it's predicated on you sort of accepting his broader externalist account of knowledge, right? Sorry, I know these are big words, but this is just an example to point out, yeah, your sort of epistemological commitments, how you think that you acquire knowledge is basically going to determine the sort of defense that you give of the Christian faith, right? If you think all reasoning is circular in the end, maybe you'll be attracted to some sort of like presuppositional apologetics, right? If you're like me and you don't believe that and you think justification only goes in one direction, you're probably going to be more favorable to a classical or evidentialist type of apologetics. If you think that, you know, for example, you have to assume the existence of God, or you have to establish the existence of God before you can argue that a miracle has happened, that's probably going to put you in the classical apologetics camp, right? If you're like me and you think that that's patently false and there's no reason you can't argue for a miracle without first establishing God, that's going to put you in the evidentialist camp. So it's more than just a, you know, theoretical conversation for people in their ivory towers. Your epistemological commitments will determine the type of defense of the faith that you offer. And so that's why I think it's good for, and another point to make is if you're engaging with skeptics, a lot of their objections to Christianity or a lot of the differences you have with them will stem from different epistemologies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Quite often when an atheist asks me for like evidence for God, I could just launch into a conversation, but we're going to often get stalled out pretty quick because we're just operating on different conceptions of evidence. So sometimes, and I don't do this to be pedantic, but sometimes I just begin with an interlocutor and be like, well, can you tell me what you like mean by evidence? And I'm not trying to be pedantic there. I'm trying to get common ground.
Yeah, I think on Jordan Peterson right now. This is getting clear on terms.
Yes. Well, I mean, it's important because being clear on your terms, again, will make sure that you're not talking past each other, that you're not equivocating, and so on and so forth. So a lot of times when an atheist asks for evidence for God, it becomes clear that they're actually asking for scientific or empirical evidence for God, right? Sometimes this is because that's the only category of evidence that they're going to be willing to recognize. And so then if I start trying to argue from, fact, like an argument that's not empirical in nature, then they're just going to reject it out of the gate. So sometimes it can enable you to sort of bypass all of that to just be proficient in epistemology, because you can kind of see where the difference is before you sort of play it out there in real time in the dialectic, if that makes sense.
I love that. I really want to hone in on just a blurb that you said. You said where you land on epistemology directly informs what kind of defense of the faith you give. Dude, that, like, you could post that as a tweet, as a Facebook post, as a post, and just in general. Your epistemology informs your defense of the faith. Like, I want everyone to hone in right there. Like, that's a very simple sentence, but like that sentence right there encapsulates years of competency, prowess, study, learning right there. And if you want to know why William Lane Craig defends the faith the way that he does, why Frank Turek defends the faith that he does, right? Let's throw in Cliff Connectly in there, okay, for his niche aspect of this, right?
I
Michael Jones
planting it in there.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Like all these people. Okay, if you're wanting to know why they go the different route they go, epistemology. So that's where it's at, and that's really, really important. This is not just a side thing. And they say this about politics, right? They say even if you're not have an interest in politics, politics has an interest in you. Same thing with epistemology. Even if you don't have an interest in epistemology, you are unconsciously abiding by one. You are evaluating truth claims, belief claims all day long. And hey, if you're already doing it, might as well just know what you're doing. Like, you might as well just become conscious of what you're doing, right? Or do you just not like knowing things? Like, I like knowing things. I think it's great to know things. You know what I'm saying, Dave? I'm using know in the loose sense. In the strict sense, I don't care about knowing things. You like to know little things. In the strict sense, for me, it doesn't really matter to me. And you know what I mean by that. So. Yeah, you're a knowledge guy. I forgot about that. Let's see. Someone asked you this question. Does Dave think other miracle claims have more evidence than the resurrection of Jesus? Like medically documented ones, even if the evidence for Jesus is sufficient, are there others that are better? Take it away.
There certainly could potentially be. So like my friend Caleb Jackson gave an interesting presentation on Trinity Radio a couple years back, where like it involved somebody who apparently like got their head like completely cut off, with I think like the exception of their like windpipe, but like the neck bone and everything was completely severed, and they like managed to survive this, and it's supposed to be like medically documented. I have not looked into that case further beyond the presentation that he gave, so like I can't confirm. I'm perfectly open to there being cases that have more, evidence for them than the resurrection of Jesus. There's nothing in my method that says that can't be the case. There is not one that I am personally more confident about than the resurrection of Jesus, but that's also just because that's the one that I've given the most study to, because it has the most central importance for the Christian faith. If there are other miracles that have better evidence, particularly if it's one that's supposed to confirm a religion outside of Christianity, I'll be interested, happy to hear the case for that. But, if it's one that's within the Christian tradition, I'm a little less concerned about that. Not because it's not interesting, but just because it doesn't in any way impact my belief system. My belief system is perfectly fine with other miracles happening. Right? I believe in God. I believe he can do miracles at will. And, the Bible would lead me to conclude that he does do miracles at certain times. So I don't have a problem saying that theoretically another miracle could have better evidence than the resurrection of Jesus. I also don't make the stronger claim that I think that there is such a miracle either.
Yeah, I love that. We're not going to recourse to it's an unknown natural law. We're not going to do that here. We're
Yeah,
not going to try to explain that
not my.
miracle with an unknown natural law.
I try to stay away from the Tom Jump epistemology as much as possible.
Love it, love it, love it. Yeah, naturalism with a 99% prior. All right, good stuff. We need an exorcism. I don't think we're quite there yet, but when we do, we'll call you in, man. Okay, so yeah, man, good stuff. Thank you for explaining to us why we need that. Just like give us a little bit on. See where we are for time. Yeah, we're good. Give us a little bit on what are maybe some recommended readings when it comes to some epistemology. Like if my audience were to leave here right after you're done speaking and they were to just start researching epistemology, getting clear on that, what would be the works that you recommend they do with?
Yeah, so the book that was the most helpful to me when I tried to get into this, and I really searched long and hard for like a good introduction to epistemology. It is hard to come by one that actually like clicked with me, but the one that helped me was called "How Do We Know" by James K. Dew, or was it? I know Foreman and Dew are the two names of the authors. I forget if James was the first or second. But anyway, by Dew and Foreman, How Do We Know? It actually is written by Christians, but it's not like a person who's not a Christian couldn't get value out of it. It's written secularly enough, I think, that anyone could find value in it. But there are like some, if you are a Christian who's interested in it, then it'll probably have some things in there that'll be of interest to you, particularly like of how you can get knowledge by revelation and things of that matter. So yeah, I think that's probably the best introduction I could recommend to the topic. If you want something that's a little more mainstream but still good, a book just called Epistemology by Richard Feldman is also, it's kind of a standard introductory work. It's very good. Feldman is, of course, a wonderful evidentialist, so I enjoy that. One other one that I would mention, and it's kind of an opinionated introduction, but it's by Lawrence Bonjour. It's called Epistemology. I think it's Classical Problems and Contemporary Responses or something like that is the subtitle. Lawrence Bonjour is, of course, a hardcore internalist foundationalist like me. He doesn't hide those opinions in his book, but he's also introduces you to others. So if you want an introduction to epistemology that is sort of opinionated from where I would like you to end up, then that would also be a good introductory volume to the matter.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And just keeping track with the chat here, Weird Developer says, I think simplicity / parsimony is an overrated requirement for doxastic investment. Several data could build up to a very complex support of belief. I'm a Paul Rasmussen on you here, man. Could be very well be overrated, but it's still true. David, what do you want to say?
Well, that's a good response right there. But yeah, I mean, I think simplicity, it's actually like can be known a priori to be relevant to the truth of a proposition. And I've never understood the response that says, well, like, look, complex theories turn out to be true all the time. The simplicity thing is saying all other things being equal, you go with the simpler hypothesis. It's not saying you go with the simpler hypothesis even when, it's lacking in explanatory power and scope and ad hocness and blah, 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 blah. Of course, sometimes the more complex theory is correct. The point is, if you've got two theories that, and I mean, the example I like to give is of, having a stack of $100 bills on your dresser, and you come back and, it's a stack of $101 bills on your dresser. You come back and the whole stack is gone. I mean, you can posit one burglar took the whole stack, or you can posit 100 burglars, each took $1, clearly the better explanation is that one guy took the whole stack. Now, maybe if you have a video camera in there and you can see 100 people all come in and each take $1, then okay, you go with the more complex hypothesis because it's supported by additional factors. All other things being equal, you go with the simpler explanation. And I think it's important to highlight that that is kind of when simplicity considerations enter the picture. It's kind of an epistemic tiebreaker, not the be-all, end-all.
Yeah, I agree. And I by the way, how's my connection?
On mine, it's good. You were breaking up a little bit earlier, but for now, you're good.
Gotcha. Yeah, so I would say that a few readings. One, Richard Swinburne has literally written an old book, literally just about simplicity. And if you haven't read that entire book, like I really recommend that. I wish I could link the PDF. I just don't have it on hand. I usually do. But there's an entire book by Swinburne about simplicity. He documents the historical nature of simplicity being used either as a pragmatic virtue or as a truth-tracking virtue. Nevin Klimenhage has a paper titled The Structure of Epistemic Probabilities. And towards the end of the paper, he basically says, under his explanations account, that simplicity should always be evaluated at the same level as explanation. Not on a different level, but the same level of explanation. So once you have all your explanatory factors in place, right? And so this requires previous knowledge of the theoretical virtues, right? So I prefer Michael Keyes's systematization of them, right? That would be once you have the 3 evidential virtues laid out, right? Then on the same level of those virtues, you apply simplicity, right? That would be kind of where you go with that. So that would be kind of, and then of course, I love what you mentioned, David, about the fact that there's no absolute or like objective like simplicity. Like it's all comparative. Like when we say that something is complex, it's always in relationship to something else. Okay, so this MacBook is complex with respect to my iPhone. It's not complex to that parked car out there. So when you say something is complex, we need to know what we mean by that. I think we should give Stingy out parsimony a pass. The world is philosophically, yeah, we cannot redress that. But good work. I mean, I love the discussion here. If 100 burglars are able to break in unnoticed, how effective my surveillance system? You might have gotten scanned by the salesman. I want to disagree with something Tim said, not evaluating the world according to a particular epistemology, simply lack of belief. Well, can't help you there. All right. Moving forward, I don't know if David wants to say something like that, but I want to kind of move into some actual practical objections here. Stuff that usually emerges from people who are just not very well wielded in the epistemology realm. Stuff that comes up all the time, especially for Christians. And the first one there is going to be jumping right into the evidence realm. There is no evidence for God. Okay, so that's your proposition. Because if I were to just like throw you that proposition, there is no evidence for God. How would you start to address that?
Yeah, so obviously depending on the person, but just take it in the abstract, I'm probably going to press down on sort of what do you mean by evidence? Because it could come up to be like trivially true, right? That if by evidence, so like for example, like I've had people say like there's no empirical evidence that like Jesus existed or no scientific evidence for Jesus. And like, in one hand, it's kind of like, well, yeah, but like at the same time, that's going to be the case for most people who have lived in history. It's like looking for plastic with a metal detector. You're using the wrong tool for the job. So generally, I'm just going to say to a person, what is it that you mean by evidence? Most of the time, people who are saying this, because you'll notice that like actual smart atheists, like people like, Graham Oppie, Evan Fales, J.L. Schellenberg, these people aren't going to say, oh, there's no evidence for God. They just want to say that there's better evidence that God doesn't exist. Because philosophers typically have a pretty minimal conception of what evidence actually is. So it's not that hard to get evidence for a proposition, to the point that like testimony is going to be some form of evidence, right? Like if your parents told you that God exists, that's some sort of evidence that God exists. Is it the best sort of evidence? Is it really strong evidence? No, you could have great evidence. And that's another mistake too. These sorts of people are often assuming that you can only have evidence for like a true proposition, or that you can only have evidence on sort of one side of a disagreement, that you can't have evidence pulling in both directions, and that you have to like make a judgment of whether the evidence is stronger. So these are a lot of issues that people who sort of just make the blanket claim there's no evidence for God are typically not being sensitive to. So I, instead of like trying to present what I think is evidence for God, sometimes I try to take it back a step and just say, let's talk a little bit about what we mean by evidence, make sure we're on the same page here, because then if we get agreement there, it's probably going to follow pretty trivially that there is or is not evidence for God.
Okay. Yeah. No. What if somebody comes back and says, "Well, the only evidence that I buy is empirically verifiable, repeatable, future testable evidence."
Oh, like Tom Jones. Yeah. Sorry to keep bringing him up. You know, I've never understood what the heck is verifiable evidence, right? Like, to say something's verifiable for me means that there is evidence for it, right? So it's like we're saying, is there evidence for something?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've never really understood that particular slogan. Like, what is to say? It's like, or like John Loftus all the time likes to say like objective evidence as opposed to like,
Oh, just die
what is the
inside.
distinction between objective and subjective evidence? I'm not really clear, because like it seems like it's almost going to be, because like evidence is possessed by a person, right? Like there's not just evidence out there with no minds.
Yeah, maybe
right?
objective evidence in this sense is like, it's like some data that would evoke intersubjective, like a shared experience or something like that. Like,
Well,
like we can
something,
all
yeah.
go look at it.
Yeah, something that maybe multiple people could experience. Like that's fine, but like in that case, then like there's no like you would have no objective evidence that you exist. So then like why are we making objective evidence a requirement for rational belief? Basically, the issue here is that it seems like the person is trying to say there's no scientific evidence for God, which we could dispute if that's true or not. I think that there are actually scientific facts that you could make like an inference from to theism. And so in that sense, there could be scientific evidence for God. But even if that were not the case, there can be evidence in other categories, right? Like scientific evidence is not the be all end all. And like if God exists, he could plausibly be construed as the sort of thing that is not what science is necessarily investigating, right? God is an immaterial, invisible mind. He's not a like natural process that is going to act in like regular, repeatable ways. So there's just good reasons to think that this sort of requirement is sort of misplaced against sort of what we're trying to investigate by God in the first place.
Right.
But yeah, more fundamentally, just highlight there's other types of evidence. So even if it's true, like not much follows from that.
Well, right. I mean, at the same time, I think that we've found that most people who do not have a decent degree of philosophical competency just beg the question, like just with that objection. It's like, what's the big question begging? Like, I mean, you may believe that. I have no idea why I need to believe that. You haven't given me any reason why I need to believe that. We have unshared commitments here, brother. Right? We're gonna come.
Yeah, I mean, you can try that and be like, what is the evidence that there is no evidence for God? I think typically that comes off as like burden shifting to the, and I know we wouldn't mean it that way, but like technically you are like stating a proposition, so you should have evidence for it if you're an evidentialist, right? So it's not wrong to make that point. I just think to a lot of like people who aren't necessarily familiar with this stuff, it feels like burden shifting. So I don't usually go that route, but there's nothing wrong with that route.
Yeah, I think a lot of times people, a big part of doing philosophy well, specifically analytic philosophy, which we both love dearly, is the ability to demarcate between lucid and elegant speech and strict and elegant speech when it comes to the positions that we're talking about. And so I tend to just hold people accountable to the things that they say. It's like, you uttered this proposition. I recognize the words in that proposition. There's no force for me to accept maybe the illocution of those words that you're giving me in that proposition. Fill me in on this. Why am I being held accountable? Why am I being conformed to your commitments here? Right? A lot of the times, how people people are arguing. I think it's really, really good to get people to do that and to see exactly, because I want to be on the same page. I don't want to be defending straw men. You don't want to be defending straw men. Let's all just not defend straw men, right? Wouldn't the world be such a better? Isn't like the picture of heaven the Bible tells us about is like there's no straw men. There's no straw men in heaven. You know what I'm saying? Like we're just sharing ideas and everyone just understands what we're saying. That sounds like a good idea to me, doesn't it?
Heaven's just going to be a bunch of philosophers, huh?
You know, it's funny. It's according to Trent Doherty, that's how he views it. Is that everyone's just sharing ideas and we're just having a great time.
I'm sure there's going to be, like they were always saying in church that like, well, all our questions will be answered when we're in heaven, right? Because we're going to
yeah.
I mean, I can't say one way or the other for sure, but I feel like our intellectual journey is such a valuable thing. It doesn't just stop at death.
Yeah.
It is the sort of thing that I don't know if it like can continue eternally, but it's sort of nice to think maybe it can.
I agree with you, man. I think perfection, not as a singular unique destination point, but a process of journeying into greater and greater dimensions of perfection, I think is a good way to view it. Just like infinity, how there's different dimensions of infinity, all the way to Aleph and Not, right? Okay, the next question I have for you is it kind of goes back to the resurrection. The resurrection requires extraordinary evidence because it's obviously an extraordinary claim. What do you do with that?
Yeah, so there are a couple different ways you can interpret this, right? So I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with a gentleman by the name of Modern Atheism, and
that guy. He's a nice guy.
The way he understood that is he was just basically saying that like because it's like in like a resurrection is an event that is sort of outside of our common experience, it's something we would require more evidence for than maybe something that is kind of an everyday something that we just sort of inductively have a huge body of evidence for. If that's all that's meant when someone says extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, namely that they require more evidence than usual, I'm on board with that. And I think we have it for the case of the resurrection. So like, that's not an objection.
Done deal.
Yeah, you got to deal with the evidence. What that is typically meant to convey is it's like a slogan form of a particularly terrible argument against miracles that goes back to our old buddy David Hume. Yeah, the precise interpretation of Hume's argument is startlingly controversial. This is another problem I have with a lot of popular apologetics, by the way, is that there's this one interpretation of Hume that they keep putting forward. I think it's actually the correct interpretation of Hume's argument, but like most skeptics don't. So you're kind of arguing against something, like a point that they're not even making when they defer to Hume. But basically Hume's argument was, well, we have all of this evidence for the laws of nature, and miracles are violations of the laws of nature. So, whatever evidence you have for a miracle is just not going to outweigh the evidence for the laws of nature. So whatever evidence you want to stack up for a miracle, sorry, laws of nature are just going to win. And like, if you're sitting it from my perspective, you should be thinking something's gone wrong here because I believe in miracles and I believe in the laws of nature. What the heck is up with that?
Yeah.
Basically, it's all based on Hume's definition of a miracle as a violation of the laws of nature, which, as philosophers like Robert Larmer have made an excellent case, that's actually an incoherent definition of a miracle, because there's no mainline understanding of a law of nature on which it makes sense to say that it has been violated. It's like actually logically impossible for a law of nature to be violated on any of the major construals of what laws of nature even are. So without that definition of a miracle, it's not clear how you're going to be able to put the miracle in competition with the evidence for the laws of nature. Even if there's a coherent way to make that out, the miracle proponent has no reason to accept that definition of a miracle because, again, he believes in both laws of nature and miracles. So that's generally how I respond to Hume. Obviously, there's a whole bunch of modern reinterpretations of Hume. I actually have a video on this. It's about 2 hours long where I go through all of them in painstaking detail.
Good. Check it out, everybody.
generally people who are just going to make the claim extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence haven't even thought that deeply about it. So typically just ask for clarity. What do they mean? And if it just harmlessly means you need more evidence than usual, great, I agree, and we've got it.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. So Nick Meter, you have his book. What I like about his book is I love his interpretation, which he says, what we mean by extraordinary, the kind of interpretation we apply there is totally dependent on the background commitments of our worldview. Like I actually made a short today where I was saying, hey, is it shocking that miracles would occur if God exists? Like, is everyone like going, whoa, God exists and there's miracles? Like, dude, I just never thought, like, never in my day. Like, nobody's saying that. But if naturalism, which is the reality is close to the physical, and the physical are understood in terms of that conformity to laws of nature, whatever interpretation you want to apply there, then yeah, obviously it is shocking, right? So it's not extraordinary on the theistic worldview if everything depends at the end of the day on the existence of God, which is an agent that can supervene on what? The normal distribution of patterns of things by objects that are known as physical. It's not extraordinary.
Yeah, and that's actually the exact point that Joseph Houston made in his book responding to Mackey, because Mackey had argued that in his version of Hume's take on miracles was basically that, well, like no evidence for a miracle is ever going to put any pressure on like me as an atheist, right? Because I don't think that God exists, right? So like miracles just don't happen in my worldview. And so what Houston argued was that, well, like you can only maintain that if your, atheist beliefs are taken to be like known with certainty, if they're taken to be conclusively justified. If they're not conclusively justified, but like you're inferring atheism from like probabilistically, then there's no way in principle that like putative evidence for a miracle can just like you just don't have to consider it. You actually have to consider it because that's what's going to put pressure on you to say, okay, maybe I'm wrong about this inference, right? Maybe there is actually better evidence here. So basically, you can't take a probabilistic argument for something and use that as now I don't have to consider any other evidence. Because if it's probabilistic, something else could be more probable.
I love it. I love it. Exactly. And again, that just requires some rudimentary understanding and just being up to date with epistemology and how it works. It really just covers, we like to say, it covers a multitude of sins, right? Ethan, we see you. Good evening. What about Christians who think natural theology sucks? Well, the only thing I have to say is some of us will have more rewards and crowns in heaven than others. We love you, man. We still love you, though. Okay. Go ahead, Dave.
Well, I was going to say, and so the question there would be sort of, why do you think it sucks? If assuming that Ethan sort of takes the same route here that his friend John DePew takes, the reason for this comes from this is a similar mistake that presuppositionalists make, and it's that they think that if you give weight to natural theology, you're making it more authoritative than the revelation of God. And I think that's a really weird way to look at things. I don't think you should look at something that is like more basic or more foundational as necessarily being more authoritative. It's a very strange way of understanding authority. And so if that's what Ethan is alluding to, then I think he's just confused about the nature of an epistemic authority, in my opinion.
Yeah, because I'm an experienced first epistemologist, so I can imagine, right, that like if my entire being depends on the existence of God, and let's say that for whatever reason, God front loads me with like a rudimentary set of like basic set of experiences by which I proceed to judge the rest of the world. But it's those experiences that are the ontology of my evidence, then that would be the foundational aspect of my epistemic justifications. But that as far as something being, how would you want to put it? What's the word that people like to use when objections to the Trinity? starts with an S. It's subordinate in some way, right? God is somehow subordinate to that. In terms of any kind of revelation, would be a strange inference to me. But Ethan, you probably have great reasons for that, and you probably just destroy us one day on this topic. We'd love to hear that. But those are our thoughts. We love you, man. Okay, brother. And then last one to go here. We'll do this, and then if you guys have questions, like legitimately, then kind of get them out now before we kind of head off of here. This is kind of the amount of time I had really planned. Let's see, what's a good one to go with? Oh yeah, evidence is what compels someone to believe. You know, a lot of people believe that evidence is that which is compelling. And I almost got raked over the coals on this by trying to introduce this novel concept to the internet that it's actually not about what is compelling. Why is that maybe not the best way to view things?
Yeah, well, it's because what a person finds compelling is going to be subjective. It differs from person to person. Evidence is not like objectively or inherently compelling. There could be, and probably generally is, a like loose correlation between the strength of evidence and the degree to which it might compel belief. But I mean, we can certainly conceive of a distinction between the two, right? It is entirely possible. Like, let's say, I'm assuming we're all round earthers here. So we have great evidence that remains exactly the same for believing that the earth is round. Well, I can imagine a state where that evidence is exactly the same, and yet like I am incredibly psychologically predisposed to think that the earth is flat for whatever reason. Like that's just the nature of my genetics or whatever. I could be incredibly like compelled to believe that the earth is flat, even though the overwhelming totality of my evidence indicates that the earth is round, right? It's just a mistake to equate the two together, right? And this is one point I have to make a lot, like to people who comment on my videos and posts and things, particularly skeptics, and are like, well, I don't find that convincing. Or like Matt Dillahunty, I'm not convinced. Great, I don't care, right? It's not about whether you are personally convinced by it or not. It's can you spot a flaw in the reasoning? That I would be interested in, right? If you actually engage with it and show where the reasoning goes wrong, there's evidence that I've overlooked, right? I'm maybe giving too much weight to a certain piece of evidence. I'm not giving enough to a certain piece. Those sorts of things are actually interesting. A psychological self-report that you don't find something convincing or compelling is like I don't have enough information there for that to be interesting to me. If there's a reason why you don't find it compelling, like I don't find this compelling because, then we can have a conversation. But just I'm not convinced. Sorry, that doesn't address arguments. It doesn't address evidence.
Well, that reminds me of something that Tim McGrew actually said one time about testimonial evidence. And he said that, there's this idea that people think there's such a thing as self-interpreting data, which is a big one. And I think it's also a Dillahuntyism, because I think he also believes that if you have evidence for something, I actually believe that he, from his utterances that I've seen, from the amount of Matt Dillahunty I've seen, which is more than I've really liked to have. I've met him in person, by the way. Interesting guy. I think he denies the underdetermination problem. I truly do, because he thinks that if there's evidence for something, like all other hypotheses are off the table. Like if there were evidence for God, there would be no way in principle to make any other explanation. Like that's kind of how he views, and that just denies a very, very uncontroversial thesis in contemporary epistemology.
And one that, moreover, seems like obvious. It's just easy to come up with examples of this. I mean, even hypothetical ones where your evidence can be underdetermined. I mean, that seems like a very strange thing to deny.
Yeah, it is. It is very strange, and it is very strange. And so, I think then Tim McGrew, who says, "Hey, like let's take example. Let's say that you, with no medical education, you are shown an X-ray of, let's say, some you injured yourself, and you're given your X-ray. From just the object of the X-ray, you're probably not able to tell exactly what's going on here, like what to name everything, what this means. Yeah, like what conclusions do I come to? But then the doctor comes in, and via his reports, his testimony, he tells you this is what's happening. Now, you trust the doctor based on credentials. You trust the doctor based on the position he occupies, that, okay, this is probably what it means. Does that have to be compelling for you to take it, or are you just taking his, okay, yeah, the doctor's orders, he says he does this? There's a lot of times where I'm like, that's a very interesting conclusion, but hey, I don't know enough. I'm not I didn't spend 12 years, right, doing school, so I'm going to trust what the doc has to say. But we take that kind of evidence on all the time, right? It need not be compelling, right? So let's get to these questions here. Okay, why does Pallmann hate tag? I mean, I'm not a fan of tag either, but why do you hate tag? You hate tag? You hate it?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of the transcendental argument, and the reason why is I think that the epistemology that it depends on, so sort of like the Van Tillian Bonson sort of epistemology, or even if you want to go to like the Clarkian route, or even if you're in the sort of J. Dyer Eastern Orthodox camp of it, all types of presuppositionalism that I've ever seen are based on epistemologies that I think, if they were actually correct, would preclude not only knowledge of God, but they would actually preclude knowledge of anything. This is in part based to their commitment to basically circularity at the bottom of everything, so that we sort of have to start with some sort of presupposition that can't be justified apart from that presupposition. And so, the Christian can just sort of pick his, and, the atheist picks theirs. I also have like broader concerns, like even granting that that's not an issue, that's not going to land you in global skepticism. Let's say it is okay for us to just pick our own little bubble over here where we presuppose, Christianity, and the atheist goes over here, and then we try to do internal critiques of each other. How in the heck is that supposed to happen, right? Like, you can say, well, the atheist worldview is contradictory. Okay, but now suppose that he adopts a principle in there where he just doesn't care about contradictions. I mean, now what? It's like there's no absolute ground rules you can appeal to on this particular like conception of how interaction is supposed to take place. These internal critiques of the other position assume that the other position cares about consistency in the first place. What on earth is the justification for that? You have already admitted you're trapped inside your own little Christian bubble. So yeah, within Christianity, maybe you have to care about consistency. Although, I mean, even then, like, there's a whole, like, is there really the Christian worldview, or are there like a whole bunch of Christian worldviews? It just seems to me that it's a huge mess. The typical examples of things that you allegedly need to presuppose the Christian God to justify, like, laws of logic or problem of induction. I'm thoroughly convinced that there are perfectly rationalistic solutions to these issues, saying you need the Trinity to solve the problem of the one and the many. I'll be honest, I've never heard a person who makes that argument who I actually think understands what the philosophical problem of the one and the many actually even is. So, I mean, there's not one particular reason I don't like tag. There seem to be multiple levels to me on which this is a fundamentally flawed argument.
Well done. Well done. Jimmy says, do you think testimony is reducible?
Reducible to what? I'm not certain on
I
what
don't
he's...
know. I don't know.
I mean, it's like testimony is reducible to thoughts, I guess. That testimony is like a spoken or written version of thoughts, but I'm not sure if that's what he's asking.
Yeah, maybe, Jimmy, if you can clarify what you mean by reducible, that would help us out here, and we can answer your question a little bit better. Matt Dillahunty basically denies reasoning in uncertain terms. Yes, he denies reasoning under uncertainty, which denies the, what is it? The Schaeffer. Oh, dude, there's actually a dude. Here, let's get nerdy with this real fast. So there's the Schaeffer.
Look, if they've stuck with us for an hour and 50 minutes, then they're probably nerds themselves.
Schaeffer belief function. So that's it. The Dempster-Schaeffer theory. Yeah. And Dempster-Schaeffer theory is a general framework for how to reason under uncertainty. Like, it's an actual little framework for how to reason under uncertainty. So I guess he denies things that are, talked about. So uncertain terms, probably because he just doesn't understand basically epistemology or field of science. No. No, he debates normies mostly. Ethan, respectful reply. Don't worry, we're not worried about your hijacking here. Trust me, brother. Okay. Thanks for the answer. Have you ever read Father Deacon Ananias' papers on Tag? They're free on his website. Have you, David?
Yes, I have.
Great.
Did you wanna know my objection?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So, like, for example, real fast, is he supposed to be like, hey, if you're going to respond to Tag, you should probably be able to respond to this guy? Is that like.
He's sort of like, so if you're in, which I believe Wi-Fi Gospel is, if you're sort of in like the Eastern Orthodox wing of presuppositionalism, Father Ananias is sort of like
Your guy.
the scholar for that. Because like Jay Dyer, sorry, Wi-Fi, Jay Dyer's an idiot who doesn't know what he's talking about. Father Ananias is actually like someone who has taken the time to understand this. I have read his stuff. It's basically just the Salarzian dilemma that he applies to like a classical foundationalist view, like I would hold. And I'm sorry to say, I think that this dilemma for foundationalism has been answered by like everyone. It's been answered by Tim McGrew. It's been answered by Lawrence Bonjour, Richard Fumerton, John DePoe, like anyone.
Which problem?
The Salarzian dilemma. So basically,
Salarzian dilemma. Okay, yeah.
I don't know if you want me to spell it out. I'm sure you're.
Go ahead, professor.
Well, so yeah, so basically, classical foundationalism, or basically any view that wants to say that basic beliefs are in some way justified and that they're not just assumed or can only be circularly justified. The Salarzian dilemma, and this is the same one that Father Ananias tries to press against my position, is basically to justify your basic beliefs, you're either going to appeal to something that is propositional or non-propositional. But if it's propositional, you're appealing basically to another belief. You're appealing to something that can be true or false. And so it's not actually a basic belief, like you haven't terminated the regress. But on the other hand, if you're appealing to something that's non-propositional, then non-propositional things can't justify propositions. And so, you haven't actually solved the regress problem. My solution is I grasp the second horn of that dilemma and I say, actually, yes, there are ways for non-propositional things to justify propositions. And I, in particular, cash that out via Bertrand Russell's acquaintance theory. Yep. That's as nerdy as I'll get with it. But
yeah, I'm an experienced first epistemologist. So I'm with you there.
Right, because you wouldn't say experience is propositional, right?
No.
Smart man.
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. So there's a really good paper by this. If you read in, I think it's the Rutledge Companion to Debates in Epistemology, or no, it's called like it's Contemporary Debates in Epistemology. It's by Rutledge. I think it's a 2013, maybe 2015. And there's a debate between Timothy Williamson, who defends knowledge first epistemology, versus Trent Doherty and another guy on experience first epistemology. And Trent basically defends that our default rudimentary set of experiences that we come, just our ultimate base with, right, are natural regress stoppers. And he argues for like a Bayesian foundationalism from there on. So
yeah,
I really like
there's a lot I go with Trent on. I just I'm not a fallibilist like him.
I know, and we've talked about that a little bit. Yeah, that's good. Presuppers also confuse / conflate explanation with justification.
Yes, they do. Right. All the time, I will have a presuppositionalist ask, like, they'll say, like, well, we can justify the laws of logic, and then like, well, are you saying you can give reasons to think it's true? Like, that's sort of what Bahnsen seems to go down that route. But then other times they're like actually just giving explanations for these things. Like, look, I can tell the story about how God does it. So yes, they do conflate explanation and epistemic justification all the time.
Well, it's important because that's question begging, because there are, if we call the entities that do the justifying justifiers, well, there's debates in epistemology about what justifiers we should be holding to. We can be explanation.
Or if you even need them.
Ooh, that's a good one. That's a good one. I like that. Let's see.
Which, by the way, for the record, because I'm sure Wi-Fi Gospel's still listening, I do think that you need justifiers down to the foundational level. But point being, that's not really something that you can just take for granted in contemporary philosophy, where, externalism reigns supreme, and maybe you only need warrant and not justification. some argument actually needs to be given for why you need justification, and I think it can be given. So that's something I would agree with the presuppositionalist on.
That's good. That's good. Do you basically, okay, this is about testimony. Do you think testimony is a irreducible source of knowledge?
I'm
I wouldn't
trying
say
to interpret that. I think
I wouldn't say
like so what I think testimony is it's generally somebody who is depending on typically their own experiences or other types of knowledge that they have, and that they're basically relaying that to you via some medium. Now, I don't think that you can bottom out in just testimony plus nothing, because there's always this question there of testimony could be true or false, right? How do I sort of distinguish between those two? You need something weighing in favor of that the testimony is true or probably true. And so generally this is going to come from something like an inductive argument from the source's track record of reliability, corroboration with other sources, corroboration with sort of known archaeological findings or geographical something or other. So I do think you need other things in tandem with testimony. I'm not sure if that's what's being asked.
Yeah, irreducible source of knowledge. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to hold knowledge accountable to the strict sense of knowledge. I mean, I don't think I really need that. I think that I just need the minimal sense of probability raising when it comes to what testimony does to justify a belief for me. But ultimately, like if we say that a testimony is a declaration that is being reported by a speaker via some kind of communication act, then I think that those are in a sense, maybe some loose, necessary, sufficient conditions for like what's happening there. So,
brief clarifying question, Tim. When you say you don't need knowledge, are you saying that you just need justified belief and that you're cutting sort of the truth requirement out?
Yes. So if testimony is supposed to justify me holding a belief, right? That's in for those scenarios, all I need is just epistemic probabilities, is what I'm saying.
Are you familiar with Jonathan Sutton?
No.
He has an interesting book where he argues basically that should just be the definition of knowledge, is that you should cut truth out of it, and the analysis of knowledge should be justified belief.
So if I have if I have, let's say, proposition A, B, and C, and I have stronger justification in terms of epistemic probabilities for A over B and C, that's knowledge?
Yeah, even if they're false on his account, these would still be. It's not a very popular. I don't know of anyone except him who defends that, but he just that's what he takes knowledge.
That's cool. Well, what's your account of knowledge, real fast?
I mean, I'm a traditional, JTB, justified true belief.
According to Nathan Ormond, that makes you wholly incompetent when it comes to philosophy, if you believe that.
See, I'm aware, but I do it self-consciously. I'm aware of the so-called Gettier problem. I think it's overrated. I think there's a solution to it. You do have to slightly modify JTB. You have to be a little more precise on what you mean by justification. But it's a version of the no faults lemma response, which I would assume you're familiar with, because I know Doherty likes that response as well. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if Nathan still thinks I know nothing about philosophy then.
Well, I've been told by plenty of people I don't know anything about philosophy, so we're all right. So you're an infallibilist. Do you just make a distinct? That's how I'm reading it. Do you just randomly do things? Do you just make a distinction between weak and strong knowledge, or do you say that we can only know a few things?
I make a distinction between inferential and non-inferential knowledge, and I say that non-inferential knowledge is infallible. I guess there's a type of inferential knowledge that could be infallible, namely if you deductively infer something from what is infallibly known, that would also be certain. But generally speaking, inferential beliefs I don't think are infallible.
Great. Well, that's everything. Dave, My man, thank you for joining me today. Everyone, just go ahead. Thank Dave in the comments right now for being here. Such an awesome conversation. I'm glad we got to nerd out a little bit in the end there. And then everyone who just came, like maybe came in the latter half of this, rewatch. This has a lot of rewatch value, I would say, like a lot of rewind value. Go to the beginning. Dave talks about his personal journey, how he comes to his answers, his knowledge. He gives some secrets on how to read really well and read really fast. I know a lot of people wish that they could be fast readers, and a lot of other things. So thank you for joining me, Dave. Thank you so much for saying. And yeah, I put his link in the chat there. You can scroll up, but it'll be in the description. Faith Because of Reason. Do you have a new video coming out that everyone should know about? Something in the works right now?
I do have a new series in the works, actually.
Okay.
It's a highly requested series. It's a little bit of a departure from my typical content. It's going to go down the historical rabbit hole of the Crusades and why they were not actually as bad as they're sort of portrayed in the popular imagination, which is not to say that no bad things ever happened in there.
Right.
But
right.
It is to say that by and large, this is not a bunch of, racist Europeans going down into the Middle East to forcibly convert people to Christianity. And so, basically, I just want to give people an accurate understanding of, hey, look, this is what actually happened. Some bad stuff happened, but also some good stuff happened. Let's have a nuanced perspective about it.
I love that. Yeah, guys, Faith Because of Reason. Follow Dave. Keep up with him on YouTube. Are there any other platforms they should know about to keep up with you on?
They want to friend me on Facebook. I mean, I'm relatively active over there. And that's about the only other place.
Do you have like a public page, bro? Because I know that you have like thousands of friends at this point, and like all you got to do is like post to your just to your timeline, and it gets a lot of interactions. Like, do you have a public page, or are you just keeping it that way?
It actually is a professional page now because Facebook basically made me either I'd lose all my followers or I had to convert to a professional page a couple months ago. So it is a professional page now.
That's what's up. All right, everybody. Well, hey, thank you guys for tuning in, and a lot more videos just from me along the way. We'll be doing some more teaching types, giving you guys more strategies and frameworks to just master your beliefs that we do at Worldview Mastery. It's about your worldview journey, making your worldview your own, taking ownership over it, not just rehashing or repeating what other people believe, but knowing why you believe what you believe and having your Christian convictions follow that. So if you haven't subscribed, subscribe. That being said, have a good night, everybody.